Today, and we are doing part one today, the case manager closeout, now that the end of the year is coming close, and we're focusing on successful student transitions. Oops. I know most of us know the DLC, but just real quick, we're a nonprofit organization that connects teachers and leaders with professional learning resources and networks to really improve outcomes for diverse learners. So our focus for today is really to answer two questions. It's like, how do we effectively transfer knowledge of students to new teams? And how can I collaborate with colleagues and families to prepare students for a successful transition to next school year? So we're gonna just name the challenge real quick, go through two strategies, and at the end we'll have a Q&A. So preparing students. So what's the current challenge? Well, we know every student in some way will be experiencing some sort of transition next year. It could be new teachers, new grades, new schools, and even a return to in-person for some, because some students, which is hard to believe, would have been learning from home for over 400 days. So even for them, even though they've been in school, it'll be a significant transition if they're coming back in person. We know that teachers and administrators have a lot of information coming at them at the beginning of the year. You got maybe several or a couple of weeks of in-service, just lots of trainings, lots of paperwork. And so when special ed and EL teachers give colleagues the easy IEP to glance or the ILP to begin the school year, reports can be hard to read. And many teachers just aren't internalizing that information about what are all the accommodations that children need, what are their strengths, all that sort of stuff. So this is what sort of our central question again, what are some strategies that we could implement to better prepare knowing all the challenges that we just went through? So here's our theory. If I give teachers more descriptive information about each student with an IEP or ILP and in an easier to read format, then they will more easily understand and remember the information. So this will equip them to more quickly support students. So we're trying to speed up that time because it does take a while to get to know students, and teachers having a wealth of information about students for this year. We hope to transfer that on. So here's our first strategy. It's basically creating these letters, and we're going to show you a way to do it quickly for a lot of students all at once. But you're creating these individual student narrative letters, and you could give them to really anybody in the school that needs it. But you can imagine assistant principal, maybe there's a student has particular needs, want to have the AP be aware of it, certainly elective teachers, gen ed teachers, all of those. And we're going to get into how to do this. So, what might you highlight in these letters? Of course, what do students do well? What are their interests? Behavior supports and triggers, what do they really enjoy doing, all those type of things. And maybe even some tips sometimes around parents. If they respond better to texts versus phone calls, or aunt's really involved, you could be able to name all that in these letters would be really important. So two options. And the first one here is low tech. That's, as we all know, you essentially just create a standard letter. You'll have blanks in it, and for each student on your caseload, you put in different information. So that's only really my recommendation if you don't have many students that you support and on your caseload. The high-tech one is when you have an average, so like a bigger caseload, and we're going to show you examples of this, but essentially you're creating a form letter, then you're dropping all the information in a spreadsheet. You do a mail merge, and magically, if you have 20 students information, in a few clicks of a button, you'll get 20 letters printed out. So this is what sort of step one, if you do want to do this, is you actually create the letter, and you're really thinking through what sort of questions do I need to be asking, or so that gen ed teachers or elective teachers, again, have the information about the student that'll help get a jump start to next school year. So, what are the personal interests? What motivates them to learn? Are there specific, triggers around challenging behaviors? Who do I contact at home and how? All those type of things. So if you click on this, when you get the deck, it'll take you to a draft of this. You can make a copy and sort of edit it to make it your own. So sort of the second step after you've created your letter with all the specific questions you want answered is this is a step it's optional, but you can create a survey can actually go in the same questions you want answered in the letter, you'll put in here, and then for each student, you'll just answer those questions. I know another teacher was creating a separate survey just for parents, so they could also eventually produce letters for just a parent perspective on their own child, and also give that to families. I mean, give that to teachers. So you'll create a form. And again, if you click on this when you get the deck, it'll ask you to make a copy of it, but then you can edit it as well. So you've done the letter, you've done the form. If you didn't want to do the form, you could go straight into the spreadsheet. And essentially for every student you have, you just want, for every letter you want, you're just going to populate, you know, each of the questions for each student. So imagine you have 20 students on here, you've answered all the questions. Once you've done that, you're ready to do the mail merge. And again, whether it's in Word or Google Docs, within a few questions, you're going to be able to have, you're going to have 20 letters printed out with all the questions, you know, individualized for each of the students. So how to do that. At the end of this, there's actually a tutorial, the video. I'm not going to go through it today because I can get technical. But if you have Google Docs, just a strong recommendation, you go to the add-on portion on your Google Chrome and get an add-on. This was one, it's called Mail Merge, and it'll make it much easier. There's also another one called Autocrat you could do, but this just will make it much easier, much easier. So quick recap, and you got your letter, you're populating the spreadsheet, and then do the mail merge. And here you have 20 letters. You could then print them out and, you know, print out several for each student and pass out to all the teachers and staff that would need it. And it's, I mean, I've seen this happen. I've done it where I've worked in the past, and teachers really appreciate more of the narrative form. It's way easier than some of the technical papers we give them. All right, Mary.
Yeah. Thanks. So our second strategy is a similar strategy, but it's putting the voice in the hands of the student instead of the teacher. So this is a fantastic way to get students started on advocating for themselves and for what they need to help students understand who they are in school, and all these different pieces that go into their education. So if we're going to have students create a letter or video that introduces themselves to their next case manager, it's often helpful to have a form for them to think about all of the questions and all of the important pieces first. So over here on the right, you can see that we have an example of a thinking map that you could do with students. And it's super simple. You just have the student would put their name, they would answer the question, you know, what's your name at the top, and then 3 different buckets: their school experiences, their family experiences, and then their interests. And in this one, we have sentence starter. So a high school student could use this probably off the cuff to talk through if they were going to do a video. An elementary student might take some time. You might circle different questions for them to answer and have them write it out. And then they can use that form when they're creating a letter or making a video to share with their next case manager. If you go to the next slide, you can see a couple of ideas. You can use a couple different formats. Videos are a fantastic way to lower the barrier for students who might be nervous about writing something, or who might have less to say in writing than they would verbally. So you could use Flipgrid, you could use Seesaw, and this is also a really great way for teachers. It lowers the barrier for them too, to watch the students. It gives a great place to understand them. They can see their mannerisms, all of that. And so we would encourage you to think about how you can get your students to understand what are their levels, what are their needs, what have they been successful with in school, what have they really disliked this year, what have they really enjoyed this year, and then also so they can talk about their family. And as students get older, this is a really, really powerful way for them to be able to advocate for what they need in education, which is a life skill that every student needs. And we want to give them that voice and that power. If you go on to the next slide, you'll just see we've got some resources. We have some tutorials here for the mail merge and creating the Google Forms. So if you click on those, it'll bring you to the resources. And on the next slide, we've got a few articles about making that transition smooth, helping students get over the finish line, helping teachers get over the finish line. as they're going, especially our students who are diverse learners. And then we've got a few on the last 2 slides. We've got some bonus transition ideas that you can look through once you get the slide deck. There's too many for us to go through today. We'll get way off track and end up telling you more than you need to know today, but there's lots of ideas about how you can make this a great start at the beginning of the year for all of our students when school starts in the fall. So now we're ready to take questions and hear from you about, how you can do this or how you're doing this or what thoughts you have.
One more note too, next week we are going to have a part 2 to case manager closeout and really be focused on data and how do we kind of stamp our students' progress at the end of the year for both their families, themselves, their other teachers. And that conversation can really filter into these ideas of narrative letters and getting student buy-in to their data as they are moving forward into following grades. So I think they're complementary topics. So that is next week.